somewhere beyond the edges of our known world, behind mountains no map dares to draw, or perhaps sealed behind a barrier no eye has seen, a terrifying force waits, feared across civilizations, named in sacred texts and woven into the final chapters of prophecy. Gog and Magog have long haunted the imaginations of prophets, kings, and historians alike. Are they symbols of destruction, a hidden tribe, or a future that's already begun? In this gripping exploration, we dive deep into ancient scriptures, historical records, and real-world theories to uncover the truth about one of history's most chilling mysteries. Direct and subscribe now to History Vault. Where the past isn't forgotten, it's just waiting to be unlocked. Gog and Magog are names that have echoed through the chambers of myth, religion, and recorded history. Long before they were inscribed into the pages of the Qur'an or Bible, these names, or variants of them, appear scattered across cultures and civilizations, always associated with fear, destruction, and the foreign unknown. Some of the earliest references can be traced to the ancient Near East. In the 7th century BCE, the name Gog appears in the Hebrew Bible, specifically in the book of Ezekiel. There, Gog is described as a ruler from the land of Magog, a mysterious northern territory, leading a vast coalition of nations against Israel in a future apocalyptic war. While some theologians view this passage as purely symbolic, historians and linguists have debated whether Gog was based on an actual tribal leader or enemy of the Israelites at the time. The Assyrian and Babylonian empires, both well acquainted with constant threats from northern nomadic tribes, may have inspired this character. The name Magog itself seems to originate as a geographical label rather than person. In the genealogical tables of Genesis 10, Magog is listed as one of the sons of Japheth, the son of Noah. This places Magog among a group traditionally thought to inhabit the distant, unknown lands of the north, beyond the familiar borders of Mesopotamia and Canaan. To ancient peoples, north represented the edge of civilization, a place from which invaders came riding on horses, wild and uncontainable. It is here that the identity of Magog began to take form, not as a city or nation, but a direction, a threat, a mystery. The Greeks had their own interpretations. As Alexander the Great expanded eastward in the 4th century BCE, he reportedly encountered strange, warlike tribes beyond the Caucasus Mountains. In later legends, including the Alexander Romance, a wildly popular literary work translated into many languages, Alexander is said to build a great wall to contain savage tribes named Gog and Magog. This wall, placed somewhere near the Caspian or Black Sea, was believed to protect the civilized world from an apocalyptic invasion. Whether this was mere fiction or based on actual confrontations with fierce-steppe nomads remains unclear, but the narrative had already begun to merge folklore with geography. During the Roman era, fears of barbarian invasions became deeply entrenched. The term Scythians, used for wild horseback-riding nomads from the Eurasian steppes, began to overlap with ideas of Magog. These tribes, who lived outside the Roman world and didn't conform to its structure, were often cast as enemies of order. Later, Christian theologians such as St. Jerome and Isidore of Seville would associate Gog and Magog with northern peoples like the Huns, Goths, and even the eventual Mongols. In some early Islamic sources, particularly before the Quranic formalization of the names, there's speculation that Arab poets and storytellers had pre-Islamic references to distant, enclosed tribes associated with devastation. These stories likely stem from fragmented trade route tales, where merchants and travelers described fearsome tribes in the unknown Northeast territories. Over time, the myth of Gog and Magog absorbed countless influences, from Persian tales of Yajooj and Majooj to Central Asian stories of tribes behind iron gates, to Jewish eschatology and Christian end-times prophecy. Despite this transformation, one thing remained constant. They were always a symbol of the other, a threat from beyond, too powerful or too alien to be understood, and too dangerous to be ignored. Their transformation from tribal groups into prophetic agents of apocalyptic chaos was gradual but persistent. Civilizations facing invasions or collapse often projected their fears onto distant peoples, mythologizing them as divine punishment or cosmic destiny. Gog and Magog, in this sense, were never just people. They became vessels for collective anxiety, evolving with each era, but always representing a shadow looming just beyond the known world. In the realm of prophecy, few names appear with as much mystery and power as Gog and Magog. Their presence spans the three great Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, each offering a unique portrayal while preserving a common thread. These are not just historical figures or mythic tribes, but symbols of an ultimate confrontation between chaos and divine order. In the Hebrew Bible, Gog and Magog are introduced in the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39. The prophet Ezekiel describes a future attack on the land of Israel by a coalition of nations led by Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. The passage is vivid and apocalyptic. Gog is portrayed as a powerful and arrogant figure, commanding a vast army from the north. He leads his forces against the peaceful land of Israel, only to be met by divine wrath. God declares that he will destroy Gog and his armies with earthquakes, torrential rain, hailstones, fire, and brimstone, so that his power is known among the nations. But who is Gog in this context? Jewish scholars throughout history have debated this. Some believe Gog to be a symbolic enemy of the Jewish people, representing future Gentile aggression. Others suggested Gog was a real king, perhaps from the regions north of Israel, possibly in what is now Turkey, Armenia, or southern Russia. Magog was less a personal name and more a territory, an unknown land from the north, possibly beyond the Caucasus Mountains. The story was never just about war. It was about the final vindication of God's people and a cosmic showdown between good and evil. When Christianity emerged centuries later, early theologians inherited this vision and expanded it. In the New Testament, specifically in the book of Revelation, chapter 20, verses 7 and 9, Gog and Magog appear again, but this time with even more terrifying scope. The passage describes events after the millennium, a 1,000-year reign of peace, when Satan will be released from his prison to deceive the nations. And he shall go out to deceive the nations which are on the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle. Here, Gog and Magog are not depicted as individual people or even nations in conventional sense, but rather as vast, countless hordes, as numberless as the sand of the sea. They come from the ends of the earth to surround the camp of the saints, but are instantly destroyed by fire from heaven. This Christian version is striking because it universalizes the threat. Gog and Magog are not just northern invaders. They represent the global rebellion of humanity against divine authority, stirred by Satan himself. Over time, Christian writers came to associate Gog and Magog with whoever the perceived enemies were, from the Huns and Vikings in the early Middle Ages to Islamic powers during the Crusades. But it is in the Islamic tradition that Gog and Magog, known as Yajooj and Majooj, take on a form both apocalyptic and mysterious. The Qur'an, in Surah Al-Kahf, 18:92-98, briefly recounts the story of Dhul-Qarnayn, a righteous ruler believed by many scholars to be Alexander the Great or a figure resembling him. He travels to a region between two mountains where people complain of the corruption caused by Yajooj and Majooj. In response, Dhul-Qarnayn constructs a massive iron barrier, a wall fortified with molten copper, to seal them off. He declares that the barrier will hold until the promise of my Lord comes, at which point the wall will be destroyed and Yajooj and Majooj will surge forth once again. Later in the Quran, in Surah Al-Anbiya, 21 hours 96 minutes, it is stated, until when the dam of Gog and Magog has been opened and they, from every elevation, descend. Islamic hadith, sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, expand on these verses. In Sahih Muslim and other authentic collections, it is narrated that Yajooj and Majooj will break free near the end of time, during the rule of Isa, Jesus, son of Mary, who will have descended to earth. They will spread corruption rapidly, devouring everything in their path. Even Prophet Isa and the believers will seek refuge on Mount Sinai until God sends a special kind of worm or insect that strikes them in the necks, causing them all to die suddenly. Afterward, their bodies will decay and emit a foul stench until birds sent by Allah clear them away. Unlike the biblical accounts, which focus on war against Israel or a general rebellion against God, the Islamic narrative portrays Gog and Magog as a devastating force of nature, so vast and numerous that even divine prophets must retreat in the face of their chaos. They symbolize unchecked human power, destruction, and divine trial before the day of judgment. What's fascinating is how the core theme remains intact across the scriptures. Gog and Magog are always a force unleashed near the end, always tied to divine judgment, and always resisted, not by human armies, but by God's intervention. Each tradition, while differing in detail, agrees on their overwhelming power and catastrophic arrival. Across millennia and religions, Gog and Magog have never been dismissed as irrelevant. Instead, they are waiting, hidden, prophesied, and debated, at the very edge of history's final chapter. The tale of the mighty wall built to contain chaos has captivated believers and scholars for centuries. In the Islamic tradition, this wall, constructed by Dhul Qarnayn to trap the destructive tribes of Yajooj and Majooj, stands as one of the most fascinating and mysterious elements of Quranic narrative. But the real question remains, was this wall a physical structure that once stood somewhere on earth, or is it a metaphor for divine boundaries and end-time restraint? The account begins in Surah Al-Kahf, 18:92-98, where Allah describes the journey of Dhul Qarnayn, a powerful and just ruler who travels to the place between two mountains. There, he encounters a people who can barely communicate and who beg him for help against the terror of Yajooj and Majooj. They describe them as corruptors who wreak mischief in the land. Dhul Qarnayn agrees to help, but instead of demanding tribute, he commands the people to assist in building a colossal barrier. He forges it using iron blocks stacked until they reach the height of the mountain pass. Then he pours molten copper over it, sealing the iron in place. The result is a smooth, impenetrable wall that the Qur'an states Yajooj and Majooj could neither climb over nor dig through. Dhul Qarnayn humbly declares, "This is a mercy from my Lord, but when the promise of my Lord comes, he shall level it." This description is remarkable for its engineering detail. The Qur'an, written in the 7th century, outlines a process akin to advanced metallurgical construction, iron reinforced with a copper coating. Technologies far beyond what was commonly known to most people of the time. The specificity has led many historians and researchers to ask, was this an allegory or was it a literal wall? Over the centuries, numerous geographical theories have emerged. The most popular theories link the wall of Dhul Qarnayn to historical fortifications built in Central Asia. One notable candidate is the Derbent Wall, a massive fortification in the Caucasus region, between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, also known as the Caspian Gates. This wall was originally built by the Persians and later expanded during the time of Alexander the Great and the Sassanid Empire. Situated between two mountains, it matches the Quranic description and was intended to protect settled civilizations from northern nomadic tribes. Another theory points to the Great Wall of Gorgan in northern Iran, sometimes called the Red Snake because of the color of its bricks. This wall stretches over 195 kilometers and includes more than 30 fortresses. Some Islamic historians from the Abbasid period believe this might be the structure mentioned in the Quran, especially because it guarded the frontier between the Persian Empire and the steppes of Central Asia, homelands of the feared Turkic and Mongol tribes, often linked with Yajooj and Majooj. However, there are problems with these identifications. The Quranic wall is described as impregnable, while many of these ancient fortifications have been breached or destroyed over time. More importantly, the Quran suggests that the wall is sealed until the end of times, after which Yajooj and Majooj will be unleashed upon the world. That would mean the actual location, if it exists, is either hidden or unrecognizable today. Some modern scholars propose a symbolic interpretation. They argue that the story of Dhul Qarnayn's wall is not necessarily about geography, but about divine timing. The wall is not a physical barrier in the material world, but a spiritual boundary, a seal placed by God to restrain a catastrophic force until the appointed hour. In this view, Dhul Qarnayn represents the ultimate just ruler, perhaps even a messianic figure, who once held back the forces of anarchy with God's permission. Others link the wall to Alexander the Great, especially due to the influence of the Alexander Romance, a legendary narrative that circulated in Christian, Jewish, and Islamic cultures from the 4th century onward. In some versions, Alexander builds a great wall to trap barbarian tribes behind iron gates. These stories likely merge with Islamic narratives over time, further confusing the historical with the legendary. Interestingly, Islamic eschatology offers additional clues. In Hadith literature, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, mentioned that Yajooj and Majooj are constantly trying to dig through the wall every day. Each day, they get close to breaking through, only for the barrier to be restored overnight by divine will. One day, however, God will permit them to finally break free. This hadith implies that the wall exists, but not in a realm easily visible to mankind. It may lie in a remote or concealed place, protected not just by iron and copper, but by the decree of God. This leads to a tantalizing possibility. What if the wall is not in our visible world, but in a dimension of time? In other words, a spiritual boundary, hidden from the eyes of historians and archaeologists, waiting for divine permission to collapse. Such interpretations resonate with the metaphorical nature of many Quranic signs, real yet concealed, just as the soul, heaven, and hell are unseen yet unquestionable in the Islamic worldview. The mystery of Dhul Qarnayn's wall continues to captivate. Whether it once stood among mountains in Central Asia, or whether it stands unseen behind veils of fate, the story endures. It speaks to a deeper truth, that divine protection exists, but that it is always temporary. One day, the wall will fall, and what lies behind it, according to prophecy, will change the world forever. Throughout history, whenever empires faced existential threats from the unknown edges of the world, they looked for explanations, often turning myth into memory and legend into geography. It was within this uncertain landscape that Gog and Magog became not just characters of prophecy, but real, identifiable threats. Many historians and theologians have attempted to trace their identities, linking them to actual nomadic tribes that once struck fear across the ancient world. One of the earliest historical interpretations of Gog and Magog connects them with the Scythians, a powerful group of Iranian nomadic horsemen who roamed the Eurasian steppe between the 9th and 1st centuries BCE. The Scythians were known to the Assyrians, Persians, and Greeks as fierce warriors. Their homeland was far to the north of Mesopotamia, possibly the very north referenced in Ezekiel's account of Gog, coming from the uttermost parts of the north. The imagery fits: a massive force, descending on settled lands with speed and destruction, mounted on horseback and impossible to predict. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century CE, explicitly equated Magog with the Scythians, cementing the idea that these biblical enemies were based on real, known peoples. Later, Christian theologians would accept this connection, and by the early Middle Ages, the identities of Gog and Magog shifted with the tides of fear. In the 5th century CE, the Western Roman Empire faced a brutal series of invasions. The Huns, under Attila, swept through Europe from the east, triggering chaos and collapse. Their origin from the Eurasian steppe, their speed, and their devastating impact resembled the apocalyptic imagery of Gog and Magog. It was during this time that many Christian writers began associating Gog and Magog not just with specific tribes, but with the archetype of the barbarian invader. They were the chaos on the frontier, the vengeance of the wilderness, unleashed on the sins of the empire. Later, during the 9th and 10th centuries, the Khazar Empire, a powerful Turkic state that adopted Judaism as its official religion, became another target of speculation. Located between the Black Sea and Caspian Sea, near where many believed Dhul Qarnayn's wall once stood, the Khazars occupied a critical and mysterious region. Some Arab Muslim historians, including Al-Tabari and Ibn Kathir, wrote of enclosed tribes or wild peoples in the north, identifying them with Yajooj and Majooj. Although the Khazars themselves were a relatively organized and diplomatic power, their proximity to the feared wall region led many to speculate they were descendants or even jailers of these ancient tribes. But the most terrifying historical identification of Gog and Magog came during the 13th century, with the sudden and brutal emergence of the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan. When the Mongols swept westward, razing cities and annihilating entire populations, they seemed almost supernatural in their devastation. Their armies were fast, silent, ruthless, and seemingly unstoppable. To the people of the Islamic world, reeling from the destruction of cities like Nishapur, Samarkand, and especially Baghdad in 1258, the Mongols appear to be the fulfillment of the ancient prophecies. Many Muslim scholars and common people alike believe that Yajooj and Majooj had broken free. The hadith, which foretold the unleashing of these tribes before the Day of Judgment, was seen by many as being fulfilled. The fact that the Mongols had come from the east, from beyond the known borders, only added to the sense of dread. Their lack of a unified religion, their sheer numbers, and their total disregard for civilization resembled the destructive force described in eschatological texts. Interestingly, some Mongol leaders later converted to Islam, further confusing the narrative. If they were truly Yajooj and Majooj, how could they embrace the faith they were meant to destroy? This led many scholars to revise their views, suggesting that perhaps the Mongols were a preview, not the actual Gog and Magog, a sign but not the final threat. Beyond the Mongols, other historical groups were periodically cast into the roles of Gog and Magog. During the Crusades, some Christians believed the Muslims were Gog and Magog. Conversely, some Muslims believed the Christian invaders fit the role. This mutual projection reflected deeper truth. Gog and Magog were never just about ethnicity or geography. They were symbols of fear of the other, of whatever enemy posed an existential threat at any given moment. Even in modern times, Gog and Magog continue to appear in geopolitical rhetoric. During the Cold War, some evangelicals in the West speculated that Russia or the Soviet Union was Magog, especially when reading biblical prophecy through the lens of global politics. Similarly, some modern Islamic thinkers have suggested that current superpowers, secretive governments, or expansionist regimes may reflect the power of Yajooj and Majooj in spirit, if not in name. What becomes clear through all these historical associations is this: Gog and Magog were never fixed identities. They were adaptable archetypes, tribes, empires, or even ideologies, onto which societies projected their deepest fears. From Scythians to Mongols, from Khazars to Cold War powers, the label of Gog and Magog has followed those who exist beyond the border of comprehension, those who represent the unpredictable, the unstoppable, and the uncontainable. And yet, in all these theories, there's an underlying sense that the real Gog and Magog are still waiting, that none of the historical invaders were truly them, only echoes, that one day, the actual force hidden behind divine walls will rise, not just as a military power, but as a cosmic event. And when that happens, no historical precedent will be enough to prepare the world. Across faiths, across centuries, and across continents, the final chapter in the story of Gog and Magog has remained cloaked in mystery. Despite the many historical theories and cultural projections, all three Abrahamic religions ultimately agree on one chilling certainty: Gog and Magog will return, not as myth, not as metaphor, but as a real force unleashed before the end of the world. In Islamic eschatology, their return is considered one of the final and most terrifying signs of the Day of Judgment. The Qur'an in Surah Al-Anbiya, 21 hours 96 minutes, warns, until when the dam of Gog and Magog has been opened and they, from every elevation, descend. This verse implies a global, uncontrollable outbreak, one so overwhelming that it overtakes every height and border. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, expanded on this in multiple hadiths, describing a time when Yajooj and Majooj will be released from their barrier. In one narration from Sahih Muslim, he said that they will pass by Lake Tiberias, also known as the Sea of Galilee, and drink it dry. The last of them will pass by and say, "There was once water here." Their number, the hadith says, will be so immense that human armies will be unable to confront them. Even Isa ibn Maryam, Jesus, peace be upon him, who according to Islamic belief will descend to earth and lead the final righteous army, will retreat with the believers to Mount Sinai, praying for divine help. It is only through God's intervention that Yajooj and Majooj will be destroyed, struck down by something as seemingly insignificant as a worm or parasite in their necks, yet one that no weapon could have defeated. This narrative gives us insight into what Yajooj and Majooj represent. Not merely a military threat, but a catastrophic trial, a global disruption of balance that cannot be stopped by human might or technology. Their arrival marks a moment when the world systems collapse, when civilization proves powerless, and when divine authority reasserts its supremacy. In Christian eschatology, particularly in the book of Revelation, 20:7-9, a similar picture emerges. Gog and Magog appear again, this time after 1,000 years of peace known as the millennium. Satan is released and deceives the nations at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, gathering them for war. Their numbers are described as being like the sand of the sea, and they march across the breadth of the earth to surround the camp of God's people. But before a battle can even occur, fire comes down from heaven and consumes them. Again, it is not human effort, diplomacy, or military strength that ends a threat. It is divine action, swift and final. Some theologians interpret this as a literal end-time scenario, while others see Gog and Magog as symbolic representations of rebellion, lawlessness, or spiritual corruption. Either way, their role is to serve as a final test, a dividing line between good and evil, between the age of man and the age of divine reckoning. In Jewish tradition, the apocalyptic war Gog and Magog also plays a significant role. The book of Ezekiel speaks of Gog leading an assault on the land of Israel, only to be defeated by the power of God. Rabbinic literature is rich with debate on whether this war precedes or follows the coming of the Messiah. Some believe it will be a literal war against Israel by powerful nations, while others suggest it represents a cosmic struggle between spiritual forces. The Zohar, a foundational work in Jewish mysticism, speaks of Gog and Magog in deeply symbolic terms, suggesting that their war represents the inner battle between the forces of impurity and holiness within creation itself. In this view, the physical invasion is simply the outer manifestation of a far deeper spiritual crisis. In the modern era, the imagery of Gog and Magog continues to resonate, often shaped by geopolitics and global fears. During the Cold War, many Christian thinkers in the West saw the Soviet Union as Magog, especially due to perceived threats from the North and the atheistic nature of the regime. Some pointed to Russia's geographic proximity to Israel and its history of military power, suggesting a literal fulfillment of Ezekiel's prophecy. In the 21st century, with the rise of mass surveillance, artificial intelligence, nuclear weapons, and societal unrest, some scholars and commentators are revisiting the prophecies with new lenses. Could Gog and Magog be a global system, rather than a nation? Could their destructive force be technological or ideological, spreading across every elevation, not as armies on horseback, but as unstoppable systems that erode the spiritual and moral foundations of humanity? Within Islamic circles, this question has also been raised. With globalization, mass corruption, unprecedented warfare, and environmental collapse, many scholars wonder whether we are witnessing the early signs of a great unleashing. Are the metaphorical walls beginning to crack? Is the dam of Yajooj and Majooj already weakening? One cannot ignore the specific imagery used in both the Qur'an and the Bible, terms like descending from every elevation covering the earth and deceiving all nations. These descriptions seem to transcend simple tribal warfare. They point to a force that overwhelms borders, defies resistance, and engulfs the world not just physically, but spiritually. Yet despite all the speculation, one truth remains consistent across all traditions. Gog and Magog will appear only when the time is right, not by accident, not by discovery, but by divine will. Their return is not just a historical event, but a test, one that no amount of preparation can fully counter without faith, patience, and divine guidance. Until then, humanity watches the horizon. Some look for armies, others look for patterns. But all, knowingly or unknowingly, await a moment when ancient prophecy tears through the fabric of modern reality, when the wall finally breaks, and what lies behind it is no longer legend but present. We've searched the scrolls of time, from ancient prophets to modern thinkers. But the question remains, have Gog and Magog already emerged? Or are they still clawing at the walls of fate, waiting for the moment to descend? One day, the barrier will fall. And when it does, the world may no longer have time to ask questions. Will we recognize them when they rise? Or will we already be standing among them? Compass this is not the end. It's only the beginning of truth. Bell-like, comment, and subscribe to History Vault for more forbidden history, revealed secrets, and the stories they never wanted you to hear.